Today we honor Harriett Louisa Stevenson Walker and her family. She was born the 21st of November, 1880, at Big Cottonwood, Salt Lake County, Utah, the daughter of Edward Stevenson and Emily Electa Williams. Harriett was blessed by her father February 3, 1881, and was baptized April 4, 1889, by William Bowthorpe, and confirmed the same day by Francis McDonald. As a girl, Harriett was Sunday school organist in the Cottonwood and Brinton wards. She was endowed in the Salt Lake Temple September 11, 1901. Harriett Louisa Stevenson and Franklin Walker were married in the Salt Lake Temple September 11, 1901.
Franklin Walker was the son of William Holmes Walker and Harriet May Paul. He was born August 31, 1878, in what was then known as Big Cottonwood, Utah. He was blessed by Santa Ana Casto in 1878, baptized June 4, 1886, and confirmed the same date. Franklin was ordained a teacher February 11, 1901, ordained an elder June 3, 1901, ordained a 70 March 10, 1913 by Francis McDonald, and ordained an high priest August 18, 1919 by Apostle Melvin Joseph Ballard.
Their first child, a daughter Vera, was born June 24, 1902 at Big Cottonwood.
Their second child, a son Delbert, was born in the Joseph Stevenson home September 11, 1903 at Big Cottonwood. About this time, Harriet was first counselor in the primary. Their third child, a son Clive, was born December 29, 1904 at Holiday. Their fourth child, another son, Wendell, was born February 1, 1907 at Holiday. Vernon, their fifth child, a son, was born July 16, 1909 at Holiday. Lamar, their sixth child and fifth son, was born May 22, 1911 at Holiday. Their next son and seventh child, Jean, was born December 31, 1912 at Holiday.
Ramona, their second daughter and eighth child, was born March 14, 1915 at Holiday.
Reed L., their ninth child and seventh son, was born March 23, 1917 at Holiday. About the spring of 1917, our family moved to a farm near Leslie, Custer County, Idaho. Wendell says that he was in the 6th grade and 11 years old. Harriet was Relief Society president from 1917 to 1921. The Leslie branch was organized as a ward August 18, 1919, as part of the Lost River Stake. Franklin Walker was called as the first bishop of the Leslie ward. We lived in a 2 or 3 room log cabin with unfinished logs and a dirt roof. Delbert, Clive, Wendell, Vernon, and Lamar slept in some kind of shed or granary, and they told of snow blowing in and covering their quilts. Vera was there in the summers only, for 2 or 3 summers, and stayed in Salt Lake City for school. Because of the influenza epidemic, no church meetings were held during the winter and spring of 1918 and 1919.
Maxine was born April 20, 1920 at Holiday. She was their third daughter and 10th child.
In the late fall or winter of 1923-24, our family moved back to Holiday, Utah. Some of the older brothers stayed in Leslie to work and finished the move in 1925. Franklin worked in the mines at Park City, Utah. Sometime, probably in 1924 or 1925, Dad and Mom were able to recover the family farm in Holiday. Franklin and the older sons prepared the hill along Holiday Boulevard for an orchard, and planted an orchard and grapes on the hill south of our house. July 25, 1929, 6 acres of bottomland were sold to Edmund J. Kearns for $1,000 per acre. We started remodeling our old home. It was an adobe home that grandfather William Holmes Walker had built. Clive and Vernon worked on the remodeling quite a bit. In 1932, the family started moving to Idaho. Vernon and Delbert went first to the Bowler place between Boise and Meridian. August 18, 1934, the deed was recorded in which Franklin traded the Holiday property for approximately 500 acres and half interest in a swimming resort at Meadows Valley, Idaho, and the family completed the move to Idaho. Sometime about 1935, Franklin bought a home and 20 acres in Nampa, Canyon County, Idaho, on Franklin Road. In April of 1945, we sold the Nampa place and with Vernon and Irma bought a place in Meridian, Ada County, Idaho. In 1950, Franklin bought a farm northeast of Eagle, Ada County, Idaho. On September 11, 1951, Franklin and Harriett celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary.
Maxine Walker Montague writes the following. The home at 5160 South Highland Drive, where Mother was born, was still beautiful in 1990 when we visited it, although it has been somewhat changed and had been converted into a Stevenson reception center. It was a typical pioneer home of adobe brick. The walls were 2 feet thick. It could have had 2 families in it. Grandmother Stevenson had wanted more room, and when Grandpa Stevenson was away on a mission, she took on the job herself. She ordered lumber and other materials, and she and her son added 2 rooms downstairs and 3 bedrooms upstairs. It was a story and a half, with a screen porch and a veranda across the front, upstairs and down. In the parlor there was a beautiful bay window with lace curtains and a nice carpet. When Grandma was expecting a half-sister from the east to visit her, she bought a lovely little Victorian love seat and chairs, upholstered in red velvet. There was also a nice little table. There's a story that upon Grandpa's return, he drove out to see Emily and was rather upset at the changes that had been made. He made the comment, "Well, you've taken on a lion." Then he whipped his horse and drove away without going in. Later, he was proud to bring friends to see Emily's home. Mother said it was like having a stranger come to visit when her father came, and Grandma treated him like a king. Mother remembers he always had a pocket full of peppermints, and she would go with him many times when he visited state conferences on assignments, and would sit with him on the stand. She remembered that when she was quite young, the willow tree was struck by lightning. It was frightening to see that big tree split in half. It was still there in 1989 in front of the house, a little to the south by the driveway. She remembers also a time when she gathered up an apron full of kittens and took them in to show her mother, who was in the middle of a Relief Society meeting with her counselors in the parlor. She loved to go with her mother on Relief Society visits to the sick and needy. They would go miles in a horse and buggy. Her mother worked hard to help those sisters. Another time, when it was her responsibility to do the dishes, she was anxious to go out and play and didn't do a very thorough job. Her mother, upon discovering the smeary glasses and plates, had her come back in the house and take all the dishes out of the cupboard and do them all over again, all of them. You can imagine that she never let that happen again. After that, she remembered overhearing her mother tell different ones how tidy and clean Hattie was, and how she kept the cupboard looking so nice, and the dishes always were sparkling clean. So you see, my mother Harriett helped in the usual household chores. Her mother was a meticulous housekeeper. Monday was wash day with the scrubbing boards and homemade soap. Heating water on the stove and boiling the clothes in soapy water was one of the steps. They used copper boilers and round tubs, which also served for the Saturday night baths. They hung the clothes outside on a line, no matter what the weather, and many times they brought the clothes in frozen stiff as board, freeze-dried. All this had to be done early. It was almost a contest to see who could get their clothes on the line first. Tuesday was ironing day. They had flat irons, which were heated on the stove. Imagine what a hot job that was in the summer. Again, they began early so they could be through before the heat of the day, and so they could have everything in order to go to Relief Society. Grandma Emily Electa Williams was Relief Society president for 20 years. One time when I was helping my mother pick raspberries from the patch at the back of the Stevenson home, she told me how she used to help her mother pick raspberries from this very same patch, and her mother told her how she loved to have her help because she could see all the berries that were down low and the ones that were hiding under the leaves. Now, what kind of child psychology is that? Not learned from any classroom. It worked on my mother and on me and on my children. When Mother was born and named Harriett Louisa, her older brother Ernest immediately began calling her Little Blue Eyes. I guess she was the pet of the whole family, but was especially close to Uncle Ernest. He was her guardian and protector and her hero. It was his chore to go to Uncle Henry's across the road, Highland Drive, to bring her home. She loved to go over there and to play, and as she got older she would help get the girls ready for Sunday school, fix their hair, tie their bows, and all those things.
Later on, Grandpa Edward Stevenson gave Harriet the mortgage on some property he had. The interest on it was a small income for her, and with this she bought a horse, Topsy, and buggy, and the piano she had. She loved to dress her nieces and take them for rides. She took them into Salt Lake to have their pictures taken, and she enjoyed taking them for rides through Liberty Park to drive around the circle. Emily Carlisle reported that at one time Mother was stopped by an officer who warned her that she must slow down a bit. She started school at the Woodstock School, Brinton Ward, where Uncle Henry taught. She was Queen of the May when she was about 12 to 14 years old. She spent much time with Cousin May, whom she loved dearly. She rode her bicycle to Salt Lake City and back for her piano lessons. I loved to hear her play some of the pieces she had memorized. She loved to ice skate, swim, hike, dance, and sing. You could always hear her singing or whistling while she worked.
There were a lot of sayings that she used, like whistling girls and crowing hens always come to some bad end. A stitch in time saves 9. For the want of a nail, the shoe was lost. Example is the best precept. It takes all summer to get the children to leave the door open and all winter to get them to close it. There is so much good in the worst of us and so much bad in the best of us that it hardly behooves any of us to talk about the rest of us. Patience is a virtue. Catch it if you can. Seldom found in a woman, and never in a man. While she was still quite young, she would get up early and fix breakfast for her brothers, who had a milk route in Salt Lake City. They had customers to whom they would deliver milk, butter, and eggs. It had to be a hot breakfast, something to stick to their ribs. Her mother thought Hattie should have the advantages of going to school in town. She went to live with Aunt Elizabeth Dufresne, who was Edward Stevenson's third wife. She lived in the 14th Ward, at 1st West and 2nd South. Another young girl was there also. Aunt Elizabeth required them to do a number of chores before school, and it seems they were not allowed enough time to properly clean up and get ready for school. I guess they complained about it some to Aunt Elizabeth, and then Hattie got brave enough to speak to her father about it. He replied that he didn't want his little girl to be vain. Undaunted, she was able to state her case. Vain? I don't have anything to be vain about. This is the only dress I have, this little old faded pink gingham. Grandpa saw to it that they were allowed enough time to take care of themselves, and also that they had some suitable clothing. This was really brave of her to confront her father like that.
Father, Franklin Walker, and Mother, Harriett Stevenson, met at the dances. She would go with her brothers. Groups of them would go to the canyons where they would hike, picnic, and enjoy the beauties of nature. There was a quaking aspen tree near Dog Lake in Big Cottonwood Canyon where Father carved their names before they were married. Reed found that tree and took a picture of it. a close-up shot of the names. Vernon, Lamar, and other brothers had also found the same tree several years before and had also added their names. One time when we were camping up Big Cottonwood, we hiked with Father and Mother to that grove of trees and saw our family tree. Father, with much patience, gentled and trained a horse, Ned, who was a natural pacer. The horse had been regarded as a renegade because he had the bad habit of putting his nose under the collar of teammates and forcing them off the road, causing accidents. They had thought of selling him, but Father's mother would not hear of it for fear that the horse would cause someone to be killed. They put the horse out to pasture. I guess he just wanted to be by himself. Father worked and saved to buy a buggy from Montgomery Ward. When his father learned of this, he talked him into going into Salt Lake Implement, where he held some stock, and they bought a nicer, better buggy. Mother said she felt like a queen when she rode with that handsome young man in that shiny new buggy behind that proud, beautiful horse. A group of young people, her brothers and their companions, would drive to Salt Lake City and then take the Bamberger to Salt Air, where they would enjoy swimming, dancing, and the drive home. The horse knew the way. One time Mother forgot to take extra stockings to wear with her swimming suit. Modesty would not permit her going without them, so after the swim, she rolled them in a towel to dry them as best she could and wore her damp stockings to the dance. Father said he could call on her any time of the day or evening and always find her neat and clean. One time he came by and she was mixing bread, and she playfully threatened to powder his cheeks with flour. He caught her wrists and held them tight. How bold, to prevent such a thing. Emma and Ernest Stevenson were often with them on these outings, also Hiram, Lester, and Eugene and their companions. After they were married, they kept a close association with their families. The wedding party was at Uncle Henry and Aunt Hannah Stevenson's home. The children marched around the table singing Ta-Ra Boom Die, Frank and Hattie's Wedding Day. Grace McDonald Fillerup told of a reception at Grandma Stevenson's. Mother remembered her mother getting after the boys for singing, "Oh, I'll bet my money on the bobtailed nag if someone will bet on the bay," saying they shouldn't sing such songs around their little sisters. Noel Stevenson was living with us after his mother died. He was in the 2nd grade. He had walked all the way from our house to the Woodstock school, and he felt so sad that he could not keep from crying. The teacher finally asked him what was the matter, and he said, "I'm sick." The teacher excused him, and he walked all the way back to our house. As he got to the kitchen door, Mother was washing dishes. She turned and saw that poor little forlorn, tear-stained boy standing there, held out her arms and gathered him up as he ran to her. Noel said, "She knew just what I needed. She held me and rocked me and comforted me. I've never forgotten that."
Maxine also wrote about Vera's 5th birthday. She said they were in Big Cottonwood Canyon. Father wove a cradle out of willows for Wendell. He hung it from a cottonwood limb and had mosquito netting over it. They lived and played there happily all through the summer. Father was hauling ore from the mines. Mother made a birthday cake up there in the canyon. A young man who was working with Father rode his horse to a store some distance away and bought candles for the cake. Father had a knack of making the campground convenient. A shelf for the wash bowl, soap, water, benches, tables, a cooler for the food. They would go home on weekends to do laundry, replenish supplies, and go to church. Quoting Maxine, "They showed me the campground years later, and the very tree and limb where they hung the cradle. I always wish they had kept the cradle." Vera said it was one of the most enjoyable and memorable summers. Maxine also remembered the following incident: a spring day and Mother hanging out laundry, and a meadowlark singing, "Maxine is a pretty little girl." Walks in the woods, seeing violets and pussy willows. Walks through the meadows and fields to visit Aunt Zella, Uncle Gene and Aunt Etta, Uncle Henry and Aunt Hannah. Sitting on the south steps cracking black walnuts. Harriet's daughter Ramona remembers that we often went up Big Cottonwood Canyon camping and hiking. The best fun of all was putting up lunch and going hiking to the lakes. Mother would hike up the steepest and longest trail, and as we went along she would point out the wildflowers and name them. Some were Indian paintbrush, sago lily, columbine, mountain laurel, and aspen trees, pines, and different berries, like chokecherries, huckleberries, wild strawberries, currants, and many others I can't recall. When we arrived at the lake, we would enjoy the beauty through her eyes.
All of her posterity owe much of their love of music and their singing ability to Mother Walker, because she could play the piano, and when we lived in Lost River, the only entertainment we had was to gather around the piano in the evenings and sing and sing. Of course, we had no radio, no television, very few books, nothing else to do, so we sang and developed our voices. 10 children in a small log cabin, bitter cold weather and things like that drew us so close as a family, really gave us a purpose and stability. Our mother taught us to love all the beauties of nature, flowers, birds, trees, sunsets, sunrises, rainbows, and running, sparkling mountain streams. She could teach us these things because of the beauty of her soul. She had beauty within.
Mother was way ahead of her time when it came to practicing sanitation and cleanliness. The washing of hands before eating, careful preparation of food. All utensils were very clean. Dishes and silver were washed with soap and boiling water poured over them. Clean bedding and sheets changed once a week. House kept clean and orderly, with much labor and no modern conveniences, were all diligently practiced by her. Her labor was one of love and selfless service. She had nutritious meals with fresh fruits and vegetables whenever possible, and canned fruits and vegetables at other times. She had a large family, and because of her great love and compassion, she helped rear her brother's children for over 2 years when their mother died. That meant 5 extra children, when she already had 6 of her own. She had to use a lot of ingenuity. She sewed clothes for all of us, making pants and coats from Father's suits. She could also make meals out of carrots and potatoes, and they were so tasty, such as creamed, mashed, baked, escalloped, fried, hash brown, and boiled potatoes and potato cakes, etc. You name it, and she could do the same with carrots. We did not have much of worldly goods. Some considered us poor, but we never felt that way because we always had something to eat, and neat clothes and happy faces. Mother's attitude was one of gratitude and appreciation for the Lord's goodness. This attitude has been passed on to her children. Joy in everyday living, the ability to look on the bright side of life and count your blessings. I think my mother was happiest when she was caring for and nurturing her little ones. Her life was one of service. She also loved beautiful music, artwork, plays, and musical. How she loved to take us to Salt Lake City, to the theater, or water theater, or a concert, or an operetta. She sacrificed a lot to see that her children had instrumental music and voice lessons. Not all, but some had these opportunities to develop their talents. She passed along the ability to sing to her children and her grandchildren. Her posterity is a singing people. She loved to go for rides and camping trips in the canyons, and how she liked to fish. You had to go some to keep up with her. She would catch the largest and the most fish. Our mother was an elect lady. She had great faith, and she endured to the end. Her reward is great in our Father's kingdom. Of that I am sure.
Harriet's oldest son, Delbert, adds the following. The Cottonwood Creek flowed near the south edge of the homestead, and the holiday graveyard laid on a knoll a few hundred paces to the north of this home. My father had rented this farm, and for this reason I was born in this 2-story brick dwelling. It still stands today, 1977, having undergone remodeling. Our next home was the 2-story adobe brick. There were 3 rooms downstairs and a nice room upstairs. Another long attic room was not used except in the winter. It was too hot in the summer due to only a window for ventilation. This home was built by Grandfather William Holmes Walker in approximately 1878. My father, Franklin Walker, was the first child of his family born there. I remember telling my mother about the shoemaker with the long beard who came to our house, and she said, "Oh, that shoemaker was never in our home. That was our grandfather." I must have been about 3 years old when this happened, because he was in Idaho most of the time before he died. I was 5 years old when he died. My grandmother, Emily Stevenson, was living close, and each morning I remember her going to Uncle Henry's house and getting a little cup of cream. She would carry the cream in her 2 hands down the street. Her ankle-length apron dangled back and forth as she walked slowly home to make her cup of tea. She could not go without that cream in her tea.
Mother and she would sometimes drink it together and would offer some to me. I would refuse because it was so nasty. She told about an experience of coming across the plains. The girls could not ride, so about 5 or 6 of them would hold on to a rope behind the wagon. The Indians came up from behind and grabbed one of the girls to kidnap her. All the girls screamed. The captain of the wagon train came back, and he settled with the Indians, and they released the girl. They traded flour to get her back. This little girl was Emily Electa Williams.
Father had a 4-horse outfit and would haul ore out of Little Cottonwood Canyon from the Cardiff mine to the railroad terminal in Sandy, Utah. He labored very hard unloading the ore by pick and shovel into the open boxcar. This was silver ore with traces of copper. The horses often became frightened by the switching of the noisy steam engine. His 4 head of well-trained horses were his pride and joy. He had a long whip, but he never had to use it. The well-fed fat horses always responded to his kind-spoken word and pulled the heavy-loaded ore wagon up each hill and around the many turns in the beautiful canyon road. I often sat with him on the spring seat high upon the driver's seat. The great heavy brakes were applied with a brake lever, having a ball at its top, making it easy to grasp and adjust. It took skill to get just the right amount of brake to keep the tugs tight and the horses pulling just a little bit, and very even as we went down the hill. It was important to keep the tugs tight and not allow the single trees to hit the horses' heels. On one of these trips he took me in a dry goods store and bought me my first hat. Mother said this was around my 3rd birthday. I hardly think I was that young, maybe 4. I recall the clerk taking down round hat boxes and trying first one hat and then another until he found my size. I was really proud of that hat. Father built a swing out of birch that would hold a net basket, and we would get into it and swing. He would send us out to feed our table scraps to the neighbors' pigs. We must have been really small, because when those pigs would stand up on the gate and their mouths wide open, they just looked really big. My younger brother Clive would stand way back and cry. We were so fearful that Mother came out and tossed the contents into the pig pen.
My recollections of my mother were that she was too good to us. She would double up her fist and pound us on the back when we disobeyed. She loved us so much that she did not hit us very hard. She worked hard. I remember helping her turn the hand washer. I did not like to do this, as it was such hard work to turn. We needed to count a certain number of turns to know when we were done. I always tried to get her to stop sooner. I can remember the good apple cobblers and fruit cakes she baked, and the big dinners with mashed potatoes and gravy.
For our paper routes, we carried the paper on horseback. My route was about 20 miles long. I carried my papers in the mornings, and sometimes it was 20 below zero. My father made me moccasins of burlap sacks to keep my feet from freezing, and I whipped my hands around my shoulders to keep them warm. I picked up my papers at 45th South and Highland Drive, then rode down to 48th South 2 miles, turning across country to the South Cottonwood Chapel, then to Vine Street, nearly to Highland Drive. then circled back to Doll Lane, then home again to my grandmother's home, where our family had taken up residence, so our mother could look after our grandmother Stevenson. This was on Highland Drive. One of Father's best horses died, and I can remember that he felt so bad. We dug a deep hole and buried him. We had to take Mother's horse and use it as a workhorse in the place of the one that died. It made Mother feel bad because she was not free to go and visit Aunt Zella and drive the buggy like she used to. It was just like giving up a family car to give up her horse. We had a few cows around. We kept one particular cow for years and years. It was a lot of work for Father to keep things going. Our house was on Holiday Boulevard. There were some big caves there, and I stayed home from school one winter, and we brought some horses from Idaho. Father put 4 horses on a Fresno leveler, and I put 2 horses on a small Fresno, and we spent all winter filling up those big caves. Then we purchased $400 worth of fruit trees, peach, cherry, and some apricots, and planted the hillside. All we put was a bucket of water in the bottom of the hole, and every time it would sprinkle or rain, we would harrow and preserve the moisture. We grew those trees for 3 years without any irrigation. We marveled at how well they grew. We noted a 6-foot growth the first year they were there. It was a good season with considerable rainfall. The ground had not been used for quite a while, and there was a lot of humus, and we took advantage of that. We did not use a lot of fertilizer in those days either. One time my father left me to cut hay with a colt and an older horse called Major. A younger brother, Lamar, was looking for rabbits which would run in from the hills to feed in our hay. It was a bit of sport for him to throw rocks at the fleeing hares as they ran out of the newly mowed hay. Unexpectedly, Lamar hit the horse, Major, right on the rump. A sudden jump from this horse caused the mowing machine to make a terrible racket, which frightened the colt, who broke into a mad run. I was thrown off the seat. My team ran straight into the raking team, driven by my brother Wendell, causing 2 runaways at once. We were not hurt. Major was cut quite bad in the hock joint. This injury made him lame the rest of his life. The harnesses were broken and had to be repaired, and a new gear was placed on the mowing machine. Father was somewhat disturbed and said, "I never had a runaway until my boys started learning to drive the teams." We had many experiences while hauling hay. Father stacked the hay as most of the skill was needed there. Clive and I pitched the hay from the piles onto slips. Wendell used the Jackson fork. The hay was lifted onto the stack by cables running through pulleys. The pulleys were attached to a log framework called a derrick. Vernon drove the derrick team and pulled the hay onto the stack. We progressed well enough to haul our own hay and work for the neighbors also. We also stacked grain sheaves for the thrashing machine. My father had just finished cutting grain with a self-binder. A lever by the seat was broken. This lever pulled the clutch on a shaft and pulled the machine out of gear. Father had to do one other thing to get it out of gear. He had to crawl under this self-binder to remove a pin from the ball chain. Taking the machine out of gear caused the thing to roll backward onto Father's head. Father spoke to his horses to go ahead. The horses never tightened a tug. Father next reached into his pocket, opened his pocket knife, and dug desperately to free himself. The pressure was so great from the weight of the machine that things became dark. He called out, "Lord, help me." The machine moved off, but the horses did not move. A miracle had taken place. I saw the black and blue marks and deep dents in the side of Father's head where the binder had held him fast to the ground. There were just small farms in the Holiday area. They were usually 8 to 10 acres. Father had 60 acres, the largest farm in Holiday. It cost $1,500. When the Baldwin Radio Works started up, many of the farmers got jobs to supplement their incomes. It was too difficult to support a family on a small farm. There also was not sufficient water for the farms. Our holiday farm did not have enough water. They rented water from Spring Creek. The city had a reservoir up Big Cottonwood Canyon, and they had that water secured for culinary purposes. Some farmers traded canal water from Utah Valley Lake for their Cottonwood Creek water, but they would not trade with us. There was a bunch of farmers on the Green Ditch that traded. Uncle Henry used to belong to that bunch, and they got plenty of water after they traded. We finally traded our bench water, and then we had water rights. They pumped water into the upper canal for us. We had a very difficult time before that to get enough water. I can remember staying up all night and having only enough water for 3 rows of beans. Our crops just dried up. We looked forward to our canyon trips for wood. The hard work was made exciting by the fact that Father arranged to take a .22 rifle with us to kill snow-white timber rabbits and willow grouse. Father had knowledge of their habits and the clever ways of the grouse's camouflage against predators. The rabbits turned white in the winter to also protect themselves. These canyon trips interfered with our schooling, but in those days the teachers were willing to give us leave of absence for the 3 days required for this labor excursion each fall. Our bedding and food supplies were prepared with care for the trip. The big box was filled with home-baked bread. A big raisin cake was packed in one side of our grub box, as we called it. This cake was my mother's specialty. She baked it in the biggest, long, flat baking tin that she had. This cake was a delight to all of us. It was more delightful to eat it up in the hills when the work was done and appetites were enlarged from the strenuous work. We made our camp at Mill D Flat in Big Cottonwood Canyon. Early in the morning, breakfast was prepared and served. The wagon was uncoupled by withdrawing the pin on the rear hound, releasing all our equipment. We took chains, our axes, and our log saw. Our lunch was secured to the front bolster. We would find a place to cut dry trees, usually about 2 or 3 miles up the North Fork, about the 3rd crossing. The road up there was very rough. The wheels bumped over many big rocks. We located and set our front part, or running gear, on a gentle slope, so when placing our skids on top of the iron-tired spoke wheels, it was very easy to roll the trees up the skid and drop them onto the bolster. Father would use his axe for a plumb bob to determine which way the tree leaned. He liked to use this skill to fall the tree uphill. They were easier to trim and snake them in above the skid for loading. Our father had lots of experience with logging in his youth. We would skid and load about 6 trees on the front running gear, and using a log chain in a U pattern around the bolster and around the logs, we would secure the logs to the running gear. We didn't need a brake. The trees dragging in the rear kept us from going too fast. In fact, when the horses came to a flat or a small hill in the road, they would need to pull hard to move onward. We returned to our camp on the flat usually before dark. Our clothes would usually be wet, frozen stiff, and we were cold. This situation was quickly overcome with a huge campfire. This trip was repeated the next day to provide enough logs for our load for home. My father would prepare canyon-style potatoes for our evening meal. The potatoes were peeled with big slices of onions and a good-sized piece of ham or bacon to give them the needed flavor. This whole meal was cooked in a big frying pan placed on rocks over hot coals, drawn out from the main fire. They tasted so good that we always wanted seconds. To our great delight, we had a piece of choice raisin cake for dessert. Our bed was made from pine boughs, which made a mattress under our quilt. Our father did everything he could to make our beds comfortable. He even put hot rocks wrapped in newspaper at the foot of our beds to warm up our feet. It was very intriguing to lie in bed and look up into the great open heavens. Our father instructed us in how to find the North Star by finding the Big Dipper and lining up the 2 stars at one end of the Dipper with the North Star. We talked about the Milky Way and the big bright stars, Venus and Mars, often called the morning and evening stars. We had sleigh riding parties, and Clive sang really well. We would sing along as we sleighed through the snow. Vera took vocal lessons from Spencer Cornwall in Sugar House. Father bought me a clarinet. This was about the time we went to Idaho, and there were no teachers up there. We had a piano in our home. It was a heavy, well-built piano. I would try to play it, but could not read music. Vera did learn. My father took us to the tabernacle, and we went up to shake hands with President Joseph F. Smith. I recall his long beard that seemed to hang to his waistline. I was probably 10 or 12 years old at the time. We moved up to Lost River near Leslie, Idaho in 1917. I would have been 14 years old. Uncle Lester was going to make the first 2 payments on the farm, and he was going to get half of it. Father investigated before we got up there and found plenty of water, but the Utah Construction Company built a dam and a large canal to take water down below to Arco Valley to water the desert. The dam seemed to eliminate groundwater, and that plus a bad drought made it again difficult to farm. The first year we had good crops, but the next year we did not have anything. The elevation was over 5,000 feet, and there were early frosts. I saw the potatoes freeze on the 13th day of August. It was also difficult to plow the ground with 3 head of horses. We suffered much for the want of food and warm clothing, in only a 3-room log house with a dirt roof for a family of 10 children. We ground our own wheat for bread and cereal. I recall once we went across the field to a neighbor to the west of us to purchase a sack of wheat before we could eat breakfast. I look back and think of those times as being very tough. We moved back to Holiday. While in Idaho, we had many joyful reunions with the saints in the Leslie Ward. I remember a fathers and sons outing held at Antelope Canyon above Darlington. This was a beautiful spot. We drove a team of horses on a light wagon to the place. The Lost River Stake was organized by Apostle Melvin J. Ballard. My father was set apart as the first bishop of the Leslie Ward. He served from 1919 to 1922. He was ordained a bishop on August 18, 1919, by Melvin J. Ballard. I was called as secretary of the Sunday school. We enjoyed some nice fishing trips together as a family while in Lost River. We stayed overnight and caught big, long strings of fish. Father made a barrel for smoking fish. The fish were so delicious when smoked. We loved going fishing, and Mom would take a big pan of baked beans. By lunchtime, they would taste so good. My mother loved to fish. She could not make herself put the wiggly worms on the hooks at first, but learned to do it when no one else was near.
Delbert remembers a mother and son project. Mail-ordered chicks. They had them in by the stove in an old tub with a lamp to keep them warm. Soon they introduced them to the hens, slipping them under their wings, and they raised a nice bunch of chickens. Delbert also remembers a fishing incident. Mother wanted to fish in a nice hole on the other side of the stream. Picture this: Delbert carrying Mother piggyback, one arm tightly wrapped around his neck, the other clutching her fishing pole. Partway across, he slipped on a mossy stone. I nearly fell with my precious burden. She squealed, "Delbert, don't you dare drop me," and he very carefully finished the crossing.
Delbert wrote to Mother on May 1st, 1936, "You know, Mother, as I see Janie playing with our little boys and other times reading and correcting them, I am reminded many times how you cuddled your little children, making them laugh so heartily right from the depths of their little souls, how you overcame numerous little difficulties with joy and laughter. How little I realized then how those happy hours spent together helped to mold character traits of honesty, love for one another, pureness of thought, respect, and usefulness. Mother dear, I hope you'll forgive me for all the disrespectful, mean things I've ever said. Of course you'll say, 'Ah, bless your heart, you've never ever been that bad.' That's just Mother again, who never would remember our faults. That makes you all the more precious."
Clive remembered Mother and her house plants. He said that Mother really had a green thumb. She learned to propagate many plants from cuttings or slips. As she would visit friends and relatives, if they had a plant she didn't have, or was unusual or exotic, she would get a slip and start it at home. It would thrive under her care. She started many varieties of roses from cuttings. She made a hothouse for each one under a 2-quart fruit jar until the weather was right, and she felt it could survive. Once her visiting teachers asked how she could keep her houseplants so nice with so many children around. Her reply was, "I just teach them to love them." One time, when Clive was just a toddler, he stripped the blossoms from a rose bush, but instead of punishing him, she taught him how beautiful they were and how she loved them, and how to touch them carefully and to enjoy the fragrance. He never spoiled them again, but always loved their beauty, and had beautiful flowers in his own yard, as did all the family.
Wendell wrote that he was a show boy at school. At one time, Grace McDonald was his teacher. She said that he always looked so nice. He had to wear knickers to school. Knickers were knee pants like some golfers still wear. One time he walked through the cemetery and tore his pants deliberately on one of those iron fences with spikes on top so that he wouldn't have to go to school. Mother nicely sewed them up. He was late for school and had to go to the principal's office. Wendell also remembers when the family lived at Lost River, Idaho, Washington's birthday came, and the school had not planned a holiday. Wendell, and we think Clive, took it upon themselves to declare a holiday. They marched around the schoolroom chanting, "No school today, no school today." Then they went over to the other school and did the same. The teachers obligingly dismissed their students and they had their holiday. But the boys were in trouble and Mother and Father had to go to school with them to have them readmitted.
Maxine remembers one night in New Meadows, where Mother and Father owned a small hot spring resort. Wally and I came up from Nampa. Wendell and Beth were there and all the cabins were full, so we slept on the floor in the folks' cabin. We got to talking, and Wendell told us some of his pranks and escapades. He was surprised to learn that Mother already knew about most of them. She made the comment, "But I always knew he was a good boy." Wendell said that was what brought him through those teenage years, his mother's love and faith in him. She nursed and loved us. We lived in the bosom of our mother. Home was a warm, loving, happy place where we wanted to be, where our friends were welcome, where there was laughter and music and storytelling and games, good food, candy making, taffy pulls, popcorn, apples, and homemade ice cream. Mother was a faithful member of the Relief Society and choir. She often taught in primary. The Holiday Ward Choir sang the Messiah with the Tabernacle Choir. Harvey Ross bought red leather-bound copies of the Messiah and had their names in gold on the copies for each member of the choir who attended all the rehearsals faithfully. Mother often led the singing in primary. She was a faithful visiting teacher. She was a good sport and had a good sense of humor.
Harriet's son Vernon adds the following: "There are so many things I remember about Mother. One thing I cherish is the tender, loving care she always gave, particularly if anyone was sick. I used to get a sore throat and sick to my stomach quite often when I was a child. Mother could always take time to make some chicken broth or some tasty soup, something kind of special, and I loved the sage tea she would make when I was miserable. I had pneumonia when I was a little boy, and I was awfully sick. I remember Dad and Mother made a bed for me on chairs near the stove to keep me warm. I am sure they worried plenty and prayed mightily for me. Another thing I love to think about occasionally is when Dad was working nights. I think at a sugar plant. Mother would gather all of us around the kitchen table in the evening and read to us. I especially remember Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn. We had lots of fun when Mother would hitch a horse to the buggy and take all of the little kids for a ride to see Aunt Zella, or Uncle Henry and Aunt Hannah, or Uncle John and his family, sometimes even into Salt Lake City. Those were horse and buggy days, not many autos. On one such trip into Salt Lake City, a car came down Main Street towards us and scared the horse so bad that she started backing up and cramped the front wheel so sharp that it partially tipped the buggy over. Lamar and I fell or jumped out and scrambled out of the way, and some men got hold of the horse, calmed her, and straightened things out, and we went on our way, but it was scary. Another scary time, it was after dark, and we headed home from Aunt Zilla's, going up what became 48 South, a dirt road then, or gravel. We were all relaxed, the horse trotting along nice and easy. Mother, as I remember, was holding Jean on her lap. Mom was relaxed and had laid the lines down, or was holding them very loosely, when suddenly a dog came charging and barking at us. The horse began to run, and I'll tell you, a frightened runaway horse is not any fun. Mother dropped Jean, she thought, in the bottom of the buggy, and grabbed the lines, and soon calmed the horse and brought her under control. Then we discovered there was no baby in the bottom of the buggy. That was really frightening. Mother turned the horse and buggy around, and we went back carefully and slowly, and soon found Jean crying at the side of the road. Apparently he was not hurt seriously, and we went on home safely. Mostly the horse and buggy trips were fun and lovely experiences. Dad and Mother often took the whole family on a trip into the mountains and other places with a team and wagon. Mother was a kind and loving hostess. People used to love to come and visit our home. I am sure they felt loved and comfortable. I remember Uncle Loren and Aunt Sadie and others visiting us for many days at a time. Mother loved the beautiful things in life: flowers, shrubs, trees, mountains, streams, birds, and people. She always managed to have nice house plants. She encouraged Dad to make birdhouses, and we usually had flowers and shrubs around our home. Even in Lost River, where the environment and climate made it so difficult to have flowers, she had beautiful sweet peas. As we were growing up, she used to take us to plays and musicals. I remember going with her to the Playhouse and Wilkes Theater in Salt Lake City, and we always went to ward shows and plays. The move to Lost River, Idaho, the Leslie area where we lived, was hard on Mother, but with her stick-to-itiveness and determination, she did really well in our little old log house. And I remember in particular the bluebirds and sweet peas making things homier.
I remember how hard it was for Mama to keep us in clean clothes. The water source was to draw water up out of a deep well, and at first wash all the clothes in the number 3 wash tub with a hand pump. Then somehow Dad got an old washer to crank by hand. The water had to be heated on a wood cook stove and carried by hand to the washer. Mother used to make the best butter, and it seemed to me that she knew how to have the cream just sour enough that the buttermilk was really good. I cranked the old butter churn many a time, and I loved buttermilk. We had lots of hard work and fun times, too. Mom was one of the best at fishing. I can picture her now, wading in the river up above the Mackey Dam, and catching a good string of fish, and oh boy, could she ever fry them just right. She was surely a good sport. I knew there were very trying times. Some people would have given up in despair, but not Mother and Dad. They probably felt like it at times, but talk about perseverance and fortitude and integrity and deep abiding love, they had it.
We finally left Lost River country and moved back to Holiday, Utah, and times were really tough. Not much income and a big family to care for. I remember Mother flying off the handle, as she called it, once in a while in Lost River, and after we moved back to Utah. It was probably good for all of us once in a while and helped keep us in line. During all of this time, I don't remember any of the details, but Mother somehow worked in taking care of Grandma Stevenson a lot of her time in her last years. When I was a teenager, I handed Mother a can that looked like it had marshmallow in it and said, "Here, Mom, have some marshmallows." She opened it, and out jumped a jack-in-the-box. She jumped, then quick as a wink said, "Oh, you little cuss, you." Then she laughed and laughed. I'll never forget that. During the 1930s, there was a Great Depression, and during that time, Dad and Mom sold the Holiday place and moved to the Boise, Idaho area. Prior to moving, we had remodeled the old home, and Mother loved it. I can't even imagine how her heart ached in selling out and moving, leaving the nicer home, the homestead, where most of her children had been born, and so many things that were near and dear to her. After moving, Dad and Mother lived in these locations in Idaho: Boise Ranch, New Meadows, Nampa, New Meadows, back to Meridian, and finally to Eagle. Through all her trials, hardships, and heartaches, I am sure her joys were predominant. Actually, there was very little complaining in her life. Her work was hard. She had little to do with, but she made do with what she had. Her faith and testimony of the gospel was deep and unwavering, and I have said many times that I gained my testimony at my mother's knee. I can remember kneeling with my arms on her knees and learning to talk with my Father in heaven when I was a little guy. My testimony has grown ever since then. There are many, many things I appreciate about Mother as I have grown older. One attribute in particular is that even though we lived very close to one another, neither Irma nor I can remember any time when Mom ever criticized the way we reared and cared for our children or managed our home and our affairs. She was always patient, kind, loving, and helpful. I love our mother.
Vernon's wife Irma adds a few lines. We probably lived closer and for a longer period of time to Grandpa and Grandma Walker than any of the other children, and I can truthfully say that she was a real mother to me. My natural mother lived far away. Grandma Walker was always willing and eager to help out whenever I needed help in time of sickness or the arrival of a new baby, etc. One of the nicest things ever said of me was her telling my sister when we lived in Eagle that though I wasn't a great housekeeper, I was a good, sweet mother. Little did she realize how much she had contributed to my being patient with our children. Just one incident will suffice to illustrate her example for me to follow. She was at our home one day when Rex, who was just a toddler, came in crying because his little car or something had broken. Grandma was sweeping the floor. I don't recall what I was doing, and she immediately laid the broom aside and said, "Let's see if we can fix it." And she did, and Rex went happily out to play, and Grandma resumed her sweeping. I've never forgotten the lesson. When a child needs attention, the sooner we can give it to him, the quicker peace is restored. One comical thing that happened when Don was about 3 years old. We could not get him to leave his clothes on. I'd dress him in the morning, and within a few minutes he'd be running around in the nude. One day when he went down to Grandma's in that condition, he had done it several times before, Grandma said, "Don, if you keep taking your clothes off, we'll have to paint you black all over." That cured him. I love her dearly, too. Mother died Monday, July 16, 1956, age 75, at Caldwell, Canyon County, Idaho, and was buried Thursday, July 19th at Meridian, Ada County, Idaho. Her obituary appeared in the Deseret News of Tuesday, July 17th, page B9, as follows. Harriett S. Walker, Eagle, Idaho. Funeral services for Mrs. Harriett Louisa Stevenson Walker, 75, will be conducted Thursday at 2 p.m. Mrs. Walker died Monday morning in a Caldwell nursing home. Born 21 November 1880 in Big Cottonwood. Married to Franklin Walker 11 September 1901 in the Salt Lake Temple.
Franklin Walker died Saturday, January 13, 1973, age 94, at Letha, Gem County, Idaho, and was buried Wednesday, January 17th, at Meridian, Ada County, Idaho. Total known posterity of Franklin and Harriett Stevenson Walker as of August 17, 1990. 11 children, 69 grandchildren, 358 great-grandchildren, 112 second-great-grandchildren, making a total posterity of 550, with 92 total spouses of children, grandchildren, etc., comes to a total posterity, including all spouses, of 641.
As descendants of these fine and faithful people, let us remember the strong, wonderful qualities and try to live our lives to make them proud of us.